So two things let's look at, briefly tag along with, obviously this particular unit, which is research for senior managers. And I'm going to just try and pull out the specification for the unit. Side by side, we can have a look at it. So in the past, what I've done is, I think this email, which I have on the screen, I had sent it to you on the 19th of January. And this was basically a good way of looking at, maybe asking you to understand how research is done, in terms of this particular unit that we will cover, which is one of the, units with the most amount of credits. So this is unit 7.5, research for senior managers. And in terms of credit value, it has 25 credits. Now, normally in this unit, the idea of doing this particular topic under this course, diploma in strategic management at master's level, is that as a supervisor, as a manager, as a leader, whatever you call it, you should be aware of the fact that why is research done within organizations? What are the key outcomes, the output which comes out of research which is done? It could be market research, it could be product research, it could be clinical research, any type of research that we look at, but generally classifying that under the category of in general, the categorization of research. The idea of studying this module is to basically understand how research is done, why research is done or undertaken by companies, and what are the key learnings which come out of research when it is done by agencies, by staff, by employees, by HR manager. Different types of research are done, but what are the key outcomes of the research and how the findings of those research are actually implemented to better achieve maybe a goal or an objective. An example here would be that assuming you are an HR manager and across the year you in the department have, say 200 employees in the company, and as a department head, which is you are an HR manager, you do a couple of, studies or surveys which actually is aimed at collecting data from your employees in the organization. So it could be a 360-degree appraisal that you do. It could be a survey which is done. It could be something which is an annual appraisal which is done with the line managers and the relevant employee. And the idea of collecting, doing this, the whole objective of doing this research or the appraisals or the surveys is to get hold of data which would help you in improving the functioning of HR and the support the employee needs in the organization to be able to achieve the overall goals and objectives set by the organization. So a particular example here would be that assume that you're working as a sales manager. And as a sales manager, you are being given this year's annual target of 2017-18 as say 1 million. Now, when you have to look at achieving that sales target of 1 million euros or pounds, you are going to be as an employee needing certain, tools, needing certain enablements to be able to achieve that target. So, for example, there should be market. You should have some data available in terms of which customers to approach, what sectors to go to, which companies to go and sell your products to. And in general, you would need maybe a certain bit of support in the background, which is operational support to be able to achieve those targets. So things like you send out quotations, you maybe go and meet out with your customers and things like that. Now, when you look at all this support infrastructure, and at the end of it, when the review is done next year by the HR and your line manager to see did you manage to achieve the target, did you not achieve the target, they will then look at doing some sort of interview, survey, or a feedback or a research into finding out what you exactly did which came out to be a success or which did not turn out to be a success in achieving the target. And that data which is collected is basically then put into some sort of an action plan to try and improve the workings of the employees and try and improve this the environment in general, so that when a task or an objective is given, you are able to achieve. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
So when you look at this particular process, this is a very simple, a very a very simple example of why an HR manager or a line manager would actually do a research, and that research is done through the outlet of doing a survey or an annual appraisal or a performance appraisal. Now, if I have to ask you to extrapolate and think maybe on a bigger scale, to look at a company which is like a consumer goods company, like Unilever, for example. You have a lot of products that we use, from Unilever, like products like marmalade, jams, yogurts, lots of other things. So if you look at a company like that, they invest a lot of money every year in doing consumer research, right? The reason why they study consumer preferences, consumers' requirements, is to try and create products which better align with their requirement. And as a result, they are able to make profits. They're able to make sales. Sales then lead to profits for the company. So when we look at this particular unit, research for senior managers, we have to understand why research in the organization is done. What are the aims and objectives of doing the research? Because this is a study. Research is nothing but a study undertaken to understand what is the problem and then get to finding results or solutions to that problem. So the idea of studying this unit would be to look at a particular area, which is an area of interest at your end. It could be, you could pick out an area which is a study that you want to do to try and find out some reasons or end results of it. So you have to discuss basically by choosing a background, looking at a problem, and then in that particular problem try and identify aims and objectives which you will do a research on or study on to try and investigate that further, that why is this a problem and how this problem, and then during the course of your study you will come out with you will collect data. You will maybe look at questionnaires, or collecting data would be through the route of questionnaires, surveys, face-to-face interviews, focus interview, whatever it is. And then once you collect this data, you're looking at then analyzing this data to create meaningful results, compilation of data. I could collect data in the form of interview, questionnaires, but how will I collate that data to come out with some findings? And then towards the end, when I create those findings and I come to some conclusion, I will make appropriate recommendations to solve that problem. So in a nutshell, what we are looking at doing is we are trying to look at undertaking a strategic level study at level 7, which will be of importance and use to you, which will be maybe a topic that is close to your heart or is something that you have been trying to look at for a while, and you will undertake that study. And using that research or the study that you do, we will come out with, some sort of a outcome after the study has been done.
Okay.
Is that okay? So my suggestion to you would be that what we want to do is we want to basically look at completing this unit. But what we will do is we will start with some sort of an identification of an area first, of which is of interest to you, which will actually cover cover the area that was of interest, and then get into it for the purposes of study.
Okay.
Is that okay? So what I'm going to do is, so this email which I sent you, I'll try and send it to you again in case which was sent. It kind of summarizes, the whole unit. It's like a little bit of a document which I have created over the years, which kind of summarizes the whole unit of what is to be achieved and what is to be done. But before we get into this, what I'm going to do is maybe take you through a small presentation which talks about areas in terms of the overall unit in particular, and will give you some brief background about why we do look at research and how research is done, or things like that, if that makes sense. Okay. So just to run with a couple of slides, and before we look at this in detail, it's about 39 slides, so I'll run through some of them so that they are self-explanatory, and I'll then email this present to you as well, which you can look at it later.
Okay.
So first things first, what do you understand by the word research? What do you think is research? How do you define research?
I think like in your first presentation, there were pick from there, like it's a study undertaken to know a particular problem in an organization, and then how to tackle that problem or situation, if I should put it that way.
Yeah, that's correct. So basically, what you've defined is, is a definition of why do, we do studies, or why do we look at a particular area, because, and how do we study it, which is through the understanding of, trying to get to the bottom of it in terms of either a problem or a situation. But research in general, is something which is, what is the process of research? It's basically, the word itself basically talks about that, it's a process through which you kind of collect information, data, and then you analyze it to be able to, come to some sort of a meaningful conclusion. And in the process of collecting, information, you can collect data. Some part of it could be knowledge. It could be data, which are different types of data. Things like, it could be, qualitative data, quantitative data. Some of the terms that I'm introducing, in the definition, because we want to look at these. And some of this could be pictures, charts, bar graphs, numbers in particular. And all this, when it is collected through the process, collected and is studied as a process, it becomes nothing but something called research. So if I look at the definition of research, it is nothing but the process of gathering information for the purposes of initiating, modifying, terminating a particular investment or a particular aim and objective. Why do you do research? And what is the process of research? Is because you study something. Reason, there is a means to an end. So you're looking at studying that because you want to come to a particular stage at which you want to look at reasons of why this is being done. So that is how we look at basically, kind of defining research. Now, when you look at research as a process, it could be defined that it is a 7-step process. Some put it this way, that it's a 5-step process or a 6-step process, but in general, there are 4 or 5 sections to the whole process of research, right? The first is, even before I undertake a study, like you're doing this course, the strategic management course, there is some reason why you're doing this course, right?
Yeah.
That reason basically could be a career progression, could be, maybe looking at, let's say, gaining knowledge. It could be completing your education, various reasons. But this reason of doing the, study basically forms nothing but the background of your study, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is like a reason or a background of why you are looking at doing this course. So similarly, when you undertake research as a activity, the first thing that we define is that why do we want to do this, or what are the reasons of why we are doing this study or this research. And that is number 1 in terms of the step, which is called defining why to do this particular study or this particular problem, understand the situation of this problem. The step 2 is, because there is a problem or there is an issue, you want to be able to analyze it in detail in the context of market, in the context of the sector, in context of how it is related to you. And that is the second step that we do, which basically consists of something called the literature review. So an example here would be that we want to understand why is the sale of Mercedes cars higher than the Audi in the UK, right? This is a question. This is a problem, or this is a question. Is a pertinent issue or a burning issue? Or if I put it the other way around, just paraphrase it, is that, let's look at between the Audis and the Mercedes or the BMWs, which cars are the best. But because you want to find out which cars are the best, and between the options of 3, you want to come to some sort of a conclusion, you have to undertake some sort of a study to test out the cars, to drive them, to understand how they are made, the mechanics, the engines used, and things like that, isn't it?
That's correct.
So all that would be basically classified as the background to your research. That at the end of the day, maybe as an individual, you want to buy a car and you are looking at doing a bit of research to understand whether I should buy a Mercedes, Audi, or a BMW. Now, when you've understood the objective of doing the study, because you want to buy a car, you get down to the basics of it to understand which one is better. And you might collect data in terms of, understanding a particular model, the engine size, literature of it, maybe a brochure and things like that, isn't it?
That's right.
So that collection of data that you do in order to do your analysis is nothing but the literature review. So you're going out to in the market to meeting the dealers or the company to collect some literature about the product, which is like a brochure for a say a 5 Series of BMW or a S class in Mercedes or a a Audi A5 or an A6. So what you do is you look at a brochure, you look at test driving the car, you look at speaking to your friends to try and gain an opinion if some of them have owned some of these models and what is their feedback on it. And all this that you do in the background to collate and create your decision criteria is nothing but the literature that you are reviewing, or the people who are currently using this particular product, you are trying to get their reviews to try and firm up your decision. And that basically forms step 2 of your research. Correct?
That's correct.
Go in the market, find out the prices, you compare prices, you try and speak to different dealerships to try and understand is there a price difference and can you get it a bit cheaper from some dealers, and these things like that. So that is step 2. Now step 3 is basically something called formulate hypothesis. Now because you're doing a study to try and find out and come to a conclusion that we need to know for sure that the Mercedes is better than the Audi and the Audi is better than the BMW. So in effect, the Audis are the best cars because of fuel efficiency, or some of the criteria that you decide. What you do in research is, or in your studies, you create some benchmark parameters that I'm going to kind of have a budget of 30,000, and within the budget of 30,000, I want to look at 3-4 things. One, I want to look at fuel economy, the best fuel economy that I want to look at for the cars. Second, I want to look at a 2-liter engine or not more than a 2-liter engine, right? Third, I want to look at a minimum of features like sat nav and mobile phone and Bluetooth connectivity and things like that. So what you're doing is you're creating a wish list of your decision making criteria, which will help you narrow down the choices that you get. And at some stage, what you will do is you will look at your choices that you've narrowed down and you will compare them with the decision making criteria that you have set for buying the car.
Okay.
Do you agree?
Yeah.
So that is nothing but formulating something called a hypothesis. You are trying to say that I'm not going to these options that I want in my car or in the price that I want are non-negotiable. So similarly, when you do research, what you do is you pick up a lot of different hypotheses that you do and you test your studies against that. Some of the hypotheses that we look at is it could be a chi-square hypothesis, which tests parameters which are there in the market to the user's perception when the data is collected, and they match it, whether it meets the criteria or it doesn't meet the criteria. So HO and H1, that means either it meets the criteria or it doesn't meet the criteria. So you do your findings and then you compare it with the literature review that you've done already to try and basically arrive at a situation whether your findings are accurate or your findings are not accurate. And that is something which is done at step 3, which is called hypothesis testing or formulating a hypothesis. Okay, we'll go into a bit more detail, and I'll give you some more reading material on the different types of hypothesis testing and how to formulate that in the research when it comes. But just overview understanding it. Now the next stage is basically doing data collection or preparing a research way of how you will go out into the market and research. So sticking to the example of buying process of a car. Now here, when I say preparing the research design is you are basically trying to shortlist of how you will gather this, what type of gathering, what type of mediums you will use to gather this. So one way of looking at gathering this information is you might go out to your friends and discuss about their experience of using the cars. The other would be you would do a bit of research in terms of reading, by reading the literature, maybe brochures, the website, reviews, and that would be also a method of collecting information. The other method, you will go out to the dealership, make an appointment, meet with them, and then at some stage collect some direct information from the car salesman. One other way could be that in this case, what you do is you go out and take a test drive. You book a test drive and you go and say, okay, now I've done enough research, but I now want to physically test the product to see what they claim is something true or not. And that is what I want to look at by doing a test drive. Correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So when you look at these things, this is nothing but the step 5, which is looking at the collection of data or points which you are going to collect as information, and these are then going to be analyzed against your own decision making criteria which you have set before you take a final decision to buy the car. Correct?
Yeah.
And then the last step is going to be, once you have done the research, you've done the you've done a lot of reading, you've asked a lot of your friends, you have looked at the literature of the the brochures of the literature, advertising material from the cars and the models, and then you have kind of come to a conclusion that, okay, this is my criteria which I set out. So my budget is 30,000. I'm looking at an automatic. I'm looking at a petrol oblique diesel. I'm looking at Bluetooth, sat nav, leather seats and whatever not. Basically, against that criteria, what you will do is you will analyze and do a bit of analysis to see which model of the car meets this criteria from the data that you've collected. And once you've done that, that process of you comparing your own set of requirements with the requirements and the study that you've done through research and collection of this data, you try and match that to see which one comes closest to your expectation. And that is nothing but something called analysis or data analysis. Okay? And the last step would be, when you have done all this, you have now at a stage wherein you want to make a decision. Okay, I'm going to go for the Mercedes E-Class because the car is the most attractive, best looking, fuel economy is good, meets the criteria in terms of my budget, has automatic and all that stuff. And when you take that conclusion or make that final decision, that is your last step in terms of closing the piece of research by looking at preparing yourself to buy that car. Correct? So in a nutshell, when you look at doing research, these are the steps or the processes that you go through, from identification to looking at the background of why you're doing this, because you had a need to buy a car. And from there, you go and do a bit of understanding in the market, collect some literature, analyze that particular data, that does it meet your requirement, is it in your budget, finally come to a conclusion where you're in a position to make a decision. Actually is the whole process of doing a research to buy a car. Okay?
Yeah.
So similarly, when you are going to do a bit of research here, is what you're going to be looking at is the similar process of undertaking these 5 or 6 steps to be able to study a particular problem and then come to a particular conclusion of doing the research. Okay, and this is something which I've shown this in a bit of a flow chart as well here.
Okay.
Now, some of the next slides basically explain the various steps of the flow chart. Step 1, define a research problem. Step 2, we'll collect a lot of background in terms of research and the data with regards to that. Step 3 is formulate hypothesis. I'm going to skip some of these which are self-explanatory and go on to some basic other definitions of key terms which we want to study and understand in this particular unit. Is that okay? Now, looking at another definition of research, what is research? Research is nothing but a search for knowledge in some cases. So if you want to do a research but you're not looking at buying a car, you are basically doing research of finding out which is the best car, because you want to find out, and you've driven maybe these 3 different types of cars or models in the past. And as an opinion, be very sure yourself that having owned a Mercedes 5 years back, or having owned an Audi 2 years back, and then having owned a BMW now, I kind of feel, I've driven all these 3 cars, but today I feel that between the 3, this is the best car, or this is the best model. So research is nothing. Similarly, it's an activity which is basically done by organizations time and again across the year, maybe across every month, to try and search for answers or knowledge, so that they have a systematic and a clinical, background, which is basically facts and figures which are proving beyond doubt that what they do or what they provide as products and services are the best in the market, or they are second best in the market, or things like that. So it's nothing but a collection of facts which at some stage becomes a knowledge, and it becomes knowledge because it is based on facts and figures or problems and situations which have been investigated in the past and have been refined to look at certain bit of solution. Okay?
Okay.
Now, as a process, again, looking at it's a series of steps that you take to try and understand, why this is to be done and, how this is to be done. So what we are going to look at is, in terms of the process, let's understand what are the different methods of doing research. So one of the methods of doing research is something called the scientific method. This method involves you're going to investigate a particular problem, you're going to acquire knowledge, and then you are going to be basically, once you've acquired the knowledge, you're going to be correcting and testing it against the previous knowledge. So where do you see scientific research happening? You think of areas wherein scientific research happens.
Scientific research.
Yes. Give me 1 second, Alex.
Okay.
Hello, UKVC. Alex, sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, so basically, can you think of what I was, I had a phone call, sorry about that. So basically just quickly thinking of, areas wherein you think, scientific methods are used for research. Where do you see research happening in the, say, scientific field? Can you think of some areas?
Areas like, the meteorologists, the.
Can you think of an example where scientific research is used or scientific method of research is used?
Like the International Space Station,
That is correct, absolutely correct. So basically, as you have rightly guessed, that scientific method of research, it is a process where, or it is a method which is basically used where experimentation, exploration is kind of required. And after doing that only, you can come to some sort of a logical conclusion. After undertaking that particular experimentation, you can find out what is the result going to be, isn't it? So when you say science, when you say space exploration, a lot of research is happening, which is through the scientific method route, wherein it has to be practically carried out before you come to an understanding that this will work or this will not work, isn't it? So scientific methods are used in those places wherein, you know, the process of experimentation allows you to basically look at understanding how problems can be solved. So scientific research is one of the methods. Scientific method is one of the methods of research which is utilized, you know, when we undertake certain studies, or when we undertake certain set of studies or research to try and come to, you know, some sort of conclusion for the problems being faced. Now, the second method that we look at is historical method. Now, historical method basically means that, you know, it involves techniques or guidelines by which historians use primary sources and others like secondary resource or things like that to basically write history. You know, so historical method approach is primarily, you know, looking at areas which are predominantly going to be comprising of, you know, let's put it this way, primarily going to be comprising of areas wherein data has to be collected and you have data available. So when we look at, say, a population census, which happens every 10 years in the UK, you have historical data which has been collected in the past, which is available to say that, and there is comparison which can be done because those are facts and figures available from previous research.
Okay.
I can make a comparison and I can say, okay, the population in the UK has increased in the early 2000s to 2010. It is increased by 5 million. So we were 62 million, now we are 65 million. So the population has increased by 3 million. Because there was historical data available to compare against the facts and figures, we are able to use this as an approach in those cases wherein we can look back into the evidence which is available to try and then do comparisons and write about it in the present times. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, now primary, there are different types of sources of research. Now what we do is, we've heard about this, that when you collect data yourself through the questionnaire and direct interface or direct interaction, then that kind of data that you collect is primary because you are collecting the data from the source. So there are different types of data collection techniques that we use to create, to collect data. And those techniques, you know, there is something called primary research, there is something called secondary research, and there is something called tertiary research. So when we look at primary research in terms of doing this type, there are two types wherein it includes collection of data which is basically not in existence in the previous sense. So you are able to collect this firsthand, and this is collected through the routes of interviews, surveys, what do you call speeches and performances, in the senses that you sometimes end up doing focus group discussions, or you end up doing group discussions in certain places where you are able to then collect data from a range of sources at the primary step. That means as a first step, and that comprises nothing but what you call is primary research. Then there is something called secondary research. Secondary research is when you are collecting data primarily from places wherein it has already been published or it is already in existence, but you might want to then kind of update the resources so that the data is quite pertinent and quite up to date. So secondary search or secondary research primarily happens on data which is collected from sources like books, journals, magazines, websites, articles, or journals which have already been published. That means that data is already in existence. So that side of research, when you do and you collect data, would primarily be classified as something called secondary research. There is something also which is called tertiary research. Have you heard of the term tertiary research? So there are three sources of research. One is primary, second is tertiary, and secondary, and the third is tertiary. Now, tertiary source is basically, a source which contains maybe a combination of primary and secondary, source, right? So tertiary would be that you can collect some data from, participants, but also you can have data which has been already previously published in academic research, or, a research which has been done for educational purposes, scientific purposes, historical purposes. But that research data, when you pull together from different types of sources like the primary and secondary, then is something which is called the tertiary source. And there are different types of tertiary sources which are available, because when a resource or when a particular form of data is archived and is kept for a number of years, then what tends to happen is that type of data is being refreshed year after year, and the successive sets of those data has also been archived. And those kind of sources could be sources like the encyclopedias. It could be textbooks in general, wherein, sometimes when you get to see that this is the volume 1 or edition 1 of a book, but this was written originally in 2006, but then the author actually created or refreshed this into a second edition, and the second edition was published in 2010. So when you refer to that kind of source, wherein there are successive sets available, like in 2006, 2010, and maybe 2014, then that becomes, something called a tertiary source. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, what we need to be able to understand is that when you start your research, we need to establish a few basic things as far as that is concerned. And that can be done by establishing why there is a need for research, or why do you want to look at doing research on a particular problem. So as of now, are there any areas or any particular topics that you want to study in a bit more detail, so that you can undertake a research study on that?
Which is not part of what we intend doing. You mean like on my own?
Yes, on your own, yes.
Oh yeah. There are some topics.
Right, okay. So for example, what I normally suggest is that it might be beneficial for you to look at maybe preparing a career plan, and you might want to do a bit of research on it. So after, say, finishing your qualification at level 7, you might want to get into a particular sector or a particular job role. And because you want to go into that, there could be various reasons why you want to go into that, because there's an area of interest. You have prior experience in that particular field. The qualification that you're gaining could also be, adding on to that, in terms of giving you more knowledge at depth. And that is one of the areas that you can pick up, to look at doing a bit more research to see if this particular outlet that you are studying and the experience that you have actually leads you into developing a career in that field.
Okay.
So this is just an example, but I think I'm going to try and show you a few research projects, just after this session, so that you are able to see and you're able to firm up a proposal that is what you're going to investigate and you're going to study this particular unit on.
Okay.
Is that okay? Now, in terms of the other slides, it basically would detail out something which I presented to you in the email which I've sent a couple of weeks back, and that email I'm going to send out again today. But to basically try and look at bringing this session to a bit of a close, what I'm going to try and show you is one or two let's say 1 or 2 research projects, which some of these students have done in the past, and that would give you sort of an idea in terms of what you need to look at developing at your end, so that we could look at doing something in this in this particular unit.
Okay.
Now, one of the research projects which was submitted by a student last month was that is it visible on the screen? Is it clear enough?
Yeah.
So one of the students actually submitted a project which was saying he wanted to investigate and study the effectiveness of transformational leadership in employee motivation, and he studied it within the context of Tesco as a company.
Okay.
Okay. Now, in this particular research project, what he has done, he is working in Tesco as an assistant manager. And what he did was, because he has been working there for about, I think, just over 5.5, 6 years, he wanted to understand that how the leadership within the store can help in motivating employees to perform better as a result to achieve the objectives set by the organization. And so he did this study because it was his place of work. It was something that he is currently involved in. And he also wanted to do this research because he wants to grow and obviously take a senior position in the store.
Okay.
Now, what he did was, just to show you, he identified the reasons why employee motivation is important when it comes to, employees working within the store. Because there's an issue when he works within the HR department in the store, he sees a lot of employees, they leave after 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. And he wants to understand what is the reason why they leave. Are they not motivated enough, or is the wage not enough, or the environment which has been provided by Tesco not good enough? And why do people leave? So he took that up and he said that I'm going to drive this as a project within the store, in Tesco's, in one of the stores he works, to try and see how I can provide leadership in this particular situation to try and reduce the employee turnover.
Right.
Okay, so it was something which is a working topic that he was interested in, and he works on a day-to-day basis on that particular topic, and he started to look at then doing this research. And I think he took about 2.5, 3 months to complete this study. And obviously this is an assignment which he has submitted at the end of it to pass this particular unit. Okay. So in this, he started the basic headlines as I've explained earlier, 7 different topics is, he's identified an area of research that he was interested in first. He's given a bit of a background, like overview of the research topic. Then he's looked at, establishing a success criteria of how this research will be carried out. And if this research that he's doing or the study that he's doing is going to be successful in the context of SCO, what will be the criteria, which will call it a success. So he's defined that. He also defined certain aims and objectives of where he will study, because he didn't want to have a very narrow scope or a very wide scope for his study. So he decided that he's going to study some 2-3 objectives and investigate them further for the purposes of his research. So he wanted to understand, is leadership related to any way employee motivation? That was his first objective, to understand and to investigate, is leadership any way related to employee motivation? He also looked at what are the factors which employee consider towards motivation. Is salary a factor for motivation? Is work hours or shift patterns an important factor for motivation? Is incentive, reputation, getting positive feedback from employees, factors which influence motivation? He shortlisted a few factors that he will study. And then he looked at testing his hypothesis to see if leadership is provided, and if these factors are enabled, will it motivate employees not to leave Tesco store? Yeah. And then what he did was he tested this particular, particular objective by defining something called a hypothesis. So, is transformational leadership, does it have any effect on motivation? Yes or no? So, if it is no, then it is, against the study. So he's going to do a bit of literature review to try and dig out if other studies have been done in Aldi or Sainsbury or other stores to see if there is a reason, if they are there, and if there is an influence, then what are the reasons and how it influences, was the research hypothesis that he formulated. And then towards the end, he's gone into various headings of doing presenting the information that what is leadership. So he's developing some background, which is nothing but literature review, that what is leadership, what type of leadership is required today in retail stores, what kind of leadership style actually works. So he's dwelled into that in a bit more detail. And this is where he's looked at understanding, some of the theories and some of the things which are required to understand these 3 questions. to create a background on the questions that he's here.
Okay.
And towards the end, what he's done is that once he has done the literature review, he's defined how he's going to collect data, for his research. And what he's done is he's maybe created a Google survey, which is attached in the end. And in that Google survey, he's created certain questions which he's asked his employees, his staff, his colleagues to answer. And then he's collected these data from this survey and then collated them into some sort of findings. If I just show you 2 pages, that might be a bit easier. So here he's done some collation of findings, you can see. Sorry, here. So he collected data from about 47 staff in the store, through the Google surveys. And then he described what are the ages in which they were their demographics, what are their education qualifications. He then collected data in terms of whether the leadership was transformational, how much of that was, related to having a good manager or a good, supervisor, and what were the reasons if you did not have a good supervisor, what is one of the reasons that you left the organization. And then towards the end, what he did was analyze the results of the objectives that were there in the sorry. And once he analyzed that, then came to presenting his conclusions. And his recommendations were then put across as conclusion that this is what needs to be done to try and improve the employee motivation in the store. They should be promotion of teamwork, promotion of building of teams, motivational factors. What kind of motivational factors should be put into practice by the manager, Tesco. And then he described this particular study in terms of limitations as well. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So this is an example of how you will need to look at maybe listing a research topic for you to be able to look at, doing this particular unit, because this is a practical unit. So you, after having the basics understanding of the types of research, how do you formulate hypotheses, aims and objectives and rationale, you will have to actually physically pick up a topic which is close to, in terms of which is a topic that you want to investigate, and then look at undertaking the research project, to do for this unit.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
And then let me give you, maybe if I have another example just to show you, is it the same one or it's the same one? So this is an example. I'll give you another example, say a previous student who had basically done a research on, say, so let's look at, so there was another student, this was certificated, this student actually finished in January. And what he has done is, he has done a research on a different topic, which is, he's done something which says, to understand the use of cloud computing, in small, medium enterprises. A lot of companies are now moving to cloud-based solutions, like accounting, for example. A lot of small businesses are using Sage, QuickBooks, and they are doing away with their accountants, because this is something which is a new paradigm now in the 21st century, is that a lot of software and a lot of solutions are available on the cloud, on the go, and a lot of small companies are able to save costs by employing some of these solutions. Like in our case as a small business, we have our learner management system, which is Moodle. So this Moodle is actually cloud-based. So you have access to it everywhere. It is not on a physical server, as against when you look at 10 years back, a lot of organizations had huge servers and, infrastructure within the office, the IT infrastructure, and they had all these things up, set up on the server. But now you can set this up on the, cloud. That means you can set it up on a rented piece of hardware, which is based in a data center. So that was a research which was done by this particular student, and this student is actually working as an IT manager in Portugal in one of the big retail companies, Carrefour. So he carried out a research in how cloud computing is used by SMEs and what are the benefits. That was the area of his research. Okay. So basically, this is to give you an idea that when you do this particular, when you do study this particular unit, what we are looking at studying in this particular unit is the basis of how you do research, and that will come across the headlines. The main topics which you are going to cover are depicted in this email, which I'm going to send to you again. But when you do research, you have to pick out an area which is an area of your interest, and that is something that you have to look at to be able to do this.
Okay.
Is that okay? I can show you. Maybe you could look at getting maybe some sort of a proposal to us, and in that proposal, we could look at basically approving that proposal before you start the research, so that I can give you a bit of guidance to say that, okay, this is an area which is appropriate, you'll be able to finish it off, and things like that. I have another student who's doing health and social care, and just to show you, she is she basically wants to do a research in patient accessibility to primary healthcare services in Wales. Now, she's working in the NHS as a practice manager, and in her own practice where she works in the hospital, she wants to look at undertaking a research, and she's given me a bit of overview of what research she would wants to do and how she will collect the data, and what are the reasons of why she wants to do this research. So maybe you can firm up something, and I can give you a bit of feedback that this is too big a study, or too narrow a study, because you have to complete this within a certain amount of time frame.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
So let me send it to you today, what we've had discussion on the slides and also this email. Hopefully, by the next week, when we start getting a bit more detail on this particular unit, you should be in a position to kind of firm up an area of research that you want to undertake for this particular module.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
No worries. And lastly, on Moodle, what I've done is there is a book that I've uploaded primarily for market research.
Okay.
Some of the things that we have covered today will basically, because this course that you're doing is strategic management, it's in the remit of business and management. So we are going to concentrate on something related to something called marketing research.
Okay.
And this email that you see here that I formulated is basically a summary of the entire book.
Right.
Right? So this is a good book to read if you want to understand how to undertake research, reasons behind why companies do research, what are the different approaches of doing the research, and how you finally come out with conclusions and findings. This will be a good read. There are lots of books available, but the reason choosing this book is that this is quite concise. It comes directly to the point, and it gives you all the relevant areas that you have to understand to be able to, understand it from a perspective of doing research at a management level. Okay, that's brilliant, Alex. So thanks for joining the session today. And what I'm going to do is obviously, catch up with you next week, regular timings on Tuesday, at 11, and we will, kind of progress this unit further.
Oh, okay. Did it Tuesday or Thursday?
Thursday, sorry. Thursday, 11.
Yeah, that's fine. No problem. Thanks for